So my name is Chung. I'm from RSI 91. There are a few of us representing our class here. So go 91. Good. We're back at George Washington University. So that's how far back we go. So I'm going to talk about decision making under uncertainty. And this is kind of a combination of the stuff I've been working on over the years as well as the stuff I've been living over the years. And I'll get to kind of the personal and the professional applications, but just a little bit how I got into this is, so I was a physics major at Harvard down the road. I got to my junior year and I thought, boy, I just do not want to be in physics for the rest of my life. And so I punted and I went the business route, eventually got an MBA, and I started doing management consulting, focused mostly on the energy sector, and that's where a lot of my examples will come from. But the reason I love this topic is because there are a lot of examples in this category of decision making under uncertainty that are applicable to not only the business world but the real world. So in the business world, if you've been working in industries like oil and gas and energy and drug development, you've encountered these big bet decisions where a lot of things can happen over time. You got a lot of dollars at stake, and you're just not going to know how well you did for years. In the business world, you talk about developing oil fields, given you drill some test wells, right? So what's the conditional probability of success of these wells? You might have in the power plant industry a prospective investment where, gosh, I don't know if I should build a coal plant, a gas plant, a nuclear plant. I don't know if that's a good idea. I just don't know how the market's going to shake out. And then those in the life science industry, you might have a poor proof of concept trial. You might think, well, wow, what does that tell me about going forward with this therapeutic area or this new indication of this compound in the therapeutic area. So those are some business examples. But then, once I started working on this stuff, 10, 15 years ago, I thought, wow, I just kind of see these decisions everywhere. So, let's talk about the real world. I was buying a house, and I was thinking, wow, what if I lose this bid? Maybe, and I really want a house by over the next month. Maybe I should put down multiple offers. Maybe it's worth the risk to me to put down earnest money and lose it on multiple houses. And people in the Bay Area in California, where I have not lived, but I've heard these stories where people just throwing lots of money down for the option premium to get in the real estate market there. Should you leave the theater during intermission if you don't like the show? So that's I'm going to come back to that example later. But one day, as I was doing this work, I realized, wow, I've learned enough in the first half of the show where I really don't have to stay for the second half, and I think I have something better to do with my time. But that's kind of that's an example of avoiding the sunk cost fallacy, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's something that if you think like an economist, that you'll start realizing that there are all sorts of options out there and all sorts of flexibility in living. My last example here is I wrote, should you mix pasta and sauce before you put it in the refrigerator? So I was in a relationship 10 or 12 years ago, and my girlfriend at the time, she had a bowl of pasta we had eaten part of, a bowl of sauce, and she's about to combine them two and put it in a Tupperware, which is very, very efficient, right, for storage. I said, stop! No, don't do that. And said, what? And I said, you're destroying option value. And I thought of all these different possibilities that you could do. Like you have sauce by itself, you could have the pasta by itself, you get one bit of pasta and one bit of dip, whatever. She looked at me like I was nuts, and I'm no longer in that relationship. But, I don't know if they're related, correlation, causality, what have you. But it's kind of addictive. You start thinking about decisions under uncertainty, and what we mean by that is really three things. And again, as we go through business examples, I encourage you to think about how does this apply to your everyday life. We face crazy decisions all the time, and to me, they're broken down into three attributes. There's the value. So, what do you want? Do you want more money? Do you want a better job? Do you want more time? Right? Then against those objectives are decisions. So, what can I do? What can I control? It's anything from should I, again, build a new power plant, to on the personal side, should I attend this talk? Now, for example, you could be thinking right now, wow, I know enough now that I can go check out the other ones, or you can go, unfortunately, there's no opportunity to reevaluate your decision. Actually, you can reevaluate any time. So, what is that, American call option? Uncertainty. So what do we not know? What are we worried about? What can we not control? I think outcome of success in a drug trial. It could be market prices for electricity, which might impact my decision, right? So it's things you want, it's things that you can control, the actions you can take, but the things that you don't know, this is the uncertainty, that's the stuff that drives people nuts in real life, on your personal decisions as well as in business decisions. And this has been a really interesting area for me. So I went to physics and I learned how to attack hard problems. It was just a very hard major for me. And then I figured out is that, wow, I'm not really afraid of these complicated problems where you might have market uncertainties, regulatory uncertainties, complicated decisions that interface with each other. And so there are a lot of young faces in the room thinking about, well, maybe I don't want to be in academia, or maybe I want to find somewhere where I can still scratch that intellectual itch. And I think this whole category of decision making under uncertainty is something that I'd be happy to talk to folks about later, but I'd also encourage you to think about getting into if you're looking for that kind of thing. And because in reality there's a lot of academic theory rooted in these areas of decision making. You go all the way back to familiar names, Laplace, Bernoulli, Bayes, et cetera, on the decision theory side, and then you mix in with organizational behavior, psychology, getting into finance, behavioral science, decision analysis, and all these things come together into these two areas that I want to talk about. Descriptive decision making, so how do we make decisions? And then the prescriptive side as well, given that we have these ways of making decisions as human beings and as companies, then what do we do about that, if anything? So let's talk about the descriptive side. I'll spend a little more time on this because it's just interesting. So the way people's minds operate can lead to all sorts of biases. I won't go through all of this here, but we may have associations, we make comparisons, we're always thinking, we're always judging, we're influenced by our cultures, we're influenced by our backgrounds, the things around us, and we tend to make a set of biases. Now there's a whole long list of cognitive biases that folks who've studied psychology will know better than I would, but so when I made a short list of things that I've seen in the business world, it really came down to three categories. Probability assessment, which is really thinking about likelihood of events. That to me is just the most fascinating. Framing, and I'll talk about that in a second, and we've kind of gotten this concept of sunk cost. All right, so let's talk about those three. So probability assessment. So the three biases that I see come up a lot in my work are representativeness, and so I'll get into the examples of each of these. Availability bias. So it's really looking at instantiation of an event as a measure of its frequency, right? And then finally, anchoring. Anchoring you see quite a bit in estimation. So sometimes these are effective as rules of thumb. If you can say like earnings based on some revenue, that might be an example. But sometimes if you want to make an objective decision, it's just not going to be the right way to go. So here's some examples. So, and these are, I know I'll just read these because I don't know if you can read them from back here. So representativeness. So just the classic example is the shy librarian concept. So these two Nobel Prize winning psychologists, Tversky and Kahneman, Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman. So they did a lot of their work in the 70s and they won the Nobel Prize, I believe actually I don't know which field, does anyone know, is it economic sciences? Okay, so it was 2002. And it's really on this area of judgment under uncertainty, descriptive decision making. And as far as I can tell, they basically went to a bunch of business schools and they used MBA students as test subjects. And they just conducted all sorts of experiments. And things like you'd have a bunch of coffee mugs and the MBA students, they'd buy these coffee mugs. And they'd buy them for, say, $3. And none of them were willing to sell it for more than $3. It was just a coffee mug that they owned for maybe a couple of minutes in class. And suddenly, it was just worth more to them because they had it. And that's this heuristic called the endowment effect. So once you own it, it's just you just ascribe more value to it. Another experiment, I don't know, for those of you who are watching Dr. Maskin talk about the second price auction. So that's been demonstrated a lot by these MBA students where, again, with coffee mugs, you saw people who were in a second price auction had put some money down. They did not want to spend $30, $40 on a coffee mug, and they're trying to not be the winner of the second prize auction. So I think this is probably some fun research that these two professors did, and they really pulled some good research together on things that we just do a lot of. Representativeness is a really interesting one. The example is, I'll just read this. Steve is very shy and withdrawn, helpful, little interest in people or in the world of reality. A meek and tidy soul. He has a need for order and structure and a passion for detail. And then the question is Steve a farmer, a librarian, a physician, an airline pilot, or a salesman? And you kind of think, it's probably a librarian, right? And I don't, I'll be honest, I don't remember what the actual answer is, but what this example spoke to when I read it, it's this fallacy of ignoring what's called the base rate of something. So if it just doesn't happen that often, then flat out the likelihood is that this is probably not what you think it is, but it really resembles a librarian. So maybe it is a librarian, but that's kind of one of the basic issues in representativeness is the base rate fallacy. Representativeness is when you hear people questioning racial profiling. This is representativeness that they're talking about, and it's kind of, and if you really kind of boil it down to the math, it's looking at Bayes' theorem and conditional probability. But that's where this comes up, and it comes up in the business world a lot when I talked about some of the possible investments in the energy industry, in drug development, oil and gas. This project looks like a good project because we invested in this environmental cleanup before, so my gut is that we should invest in this one again. And that's what, because it's got all these characteristics without maybe looking at this, the fact that these projects don't pay off historically. So that comes up quite a bit. Availability, there's some fun examples for availability, which is, like I talked about, it's sort of inferring something about the frequency of a situation just by kind of whether you can kind of grasp it in your mind. There's one example. What is more prevalent, words that start with R or words where R is the third letter? And what happens to me when I read that is I can think of all these words that start with R and all these names of admirals who start with R and names of programs that start with R. Okay, but I think the answer is that it's actually the second one, is where R is the third letter, and I wouldn't have guessed that because I just don't have access to that in my head. Availability availability is really interesting in the business world because one of the solutions for availability biases is rigorous scenario development. And what I mean by that is I'll give an example from the work industry. So one of my last projects, I just left the consulting world. My last projects was in Vancouver, BC. It was on a smart grid project where they're quantifying the benefits. Is anyone actually from Vancouver, British Columbia, or Canada? No one? Okay. All right, so this will be interesting. So British Columbia has an electricity theft problem, a big one. It's a really big one, where just people are stealing electricity. I'm curious, does anyone actually know who's stealing the electricity in British Columbia? So it's marijuana growers. So what is it? So one of the biggest industry in British Columbia and Canada is indoor marijuana growth. I mean, they're not growing it outdoors. I mean, think about the weather there. What they do is they go into a house, they'll rent it, LED lights, and grow marijuana for 3 months of the year, make a lot of money, trash the house, and leave and never be found. But they're stealing electricity not because they don't want to pay for it, because they can pay for it. It's just they don't want to get caught. It leaves a digital fingerprint. So the smart meter project that BC Hydro is putting in was in part designed to catch that issue. Now, the benefits, when I did this project for them, was to refine their business case, and one issue they had was the business case was not panning out. This does not look super profitable. They had some questions about it, and part of the reason was they weren't reaching, and this is where the availability bias came, they weren't reaching for the different scenarios of legalization, the growth of the export market of marijuana, so that might influence who's going to grow and how much would be stolen. And there things like, I should really push you. It's like, can you imagine a scenario where marijuana is legalized for limited use in the U.S. as an export market? And I was like, no. And I was so happy because this project happened in October, and then election in November, Oregon and Washington. Sorry, not Oregon, Colorado and Washington. Is that right? They legalized it, and so but that just possibly wasn't in their head. They couldn't, and that was, if they had used that as a scenario, they might have come with some better justification for their project. So I felt vindicated. Anchoring. So anchoring's fun. So okay, so this is theoretically a redwood tree. So the question is, here's the audience participation question. Is the height of the tallest redwood more or less than 1,200 feet? Should show hand who thinks more. More. Okay, and who thinks less? Less. Okay. Now imagine, just put in your head, how tall is the tallest redwood? Just like imagine, just take 10 seconds and think about how tall you think it is. Just pocket that in your head. Now, as asked, in Kahneman and Tversky's work, the response to this was 844 feet. So that's what people kind of came up with. All right. Now, I don't know if you see what's happening, but the other half of their MBA class was asked a different question. Is the height of the tallest redwood more or less than 180 feet? Now, I'm not sure in this room if your answers would change. I think we are kind of more, we tend not to have this kind of bias in this crowd, is my guess. But what's interesting is how tall is the tallest redwood? Their answer was 282 feet. So this is anchor. I mean, this is really interesting. So and then you might say, well, it's just some random trivia question, right? So and by the way, the answer is 370. So Paragon, yes. So where I've seen this again is an estimation. So if I'm here, typical thing is for power plant decisions. What is your estimate of the price of carbon? Whether you think it's a carbon tax, we think it's cap and trade or something, and it really depends on how you ask that question whether you get an answer that can be robust. If you want to come up with a range, if you might, for example. I don't want to start in the middle with you think it's $5. What I want to do is say, can you imagine a world where that price of carbon is $50? Okay, why? Can you imagine a world where it's $60? And keep pushing those envelopes. So expand the range out and de-anchor them. So this is interesting. This seems like a silly example, but I've seen this a lot because you're always trying to forecast things in the business world. I mean, it's it happens in the personal world too. Like I think one of our RSI colleagues has done a wait or walk study on for bus times, and you can get anchored to your what's available. Can you imagine the bus taking the X long or Y long? And I think that really comes up quite a bit. A couple more, and then we'll kind of move quickly to the prescriptive part. Framing. This is an illustrative example. So framing is really about are you looking at the right problem? Are you looking at it in a way that is actually appropriate to the situation? So you can overwhelm it. So this is actually let's go over here. So here's a nondescript morphic person in a cartoon canoe. So blindness. So what's blindness? So errors are the third kind. It's the right answer, wrong question, unforeseen threats, just not really seeing what's around them, just really focus on rowing, lost opportunities. You look on the far right, so somewhere right there, that's where that canoe driver is. Overwhelming with, if you have an overwhelming problem, you might not make decisions. You might just not be able to move forward. And this is a funny example because what's really happening is the canoe is about to go down a waterfall, but you can't see if you zoom in right there, and you can't see if you're far away. So I always like this picture. In the energy world, I've seen this one too, where I work with people who are trying to reduce emissions of coal plants, and there are 4 or 5 really bad emissions that come out of coal plants. Even with the exception, let's put carbon to the side, which is the biggest one, but talk about sulfur dioxide. There are technologies you can install to reduce, say, sulfur dioxide. And there are other ones that you can reduce sulfur dioxide and mercury. And then if you tackle something else, you can reduce particulate or soot. And then in the blindness situation, some folks are saying, well, I'm only going to focus on mercury, or I'm going to focus on sulfur dioxide. I've seen that happen, and we realize they should look at least what's the biggest bang for your buck on different effluents they could reduce. And the overwhelming problem, wow, I've got 4 or 5 things, and I just got to wait and see these regulations, and I've seen that too. So this one happens a lot. And then the last one, we talked about the sunk cost example. This is really the same example that we talked about, except it's on a Red Sox ticket and they're losing Game 3 of the World Series, which they don't. I'm a fair weather Sox fan, and it's admitted. But the economist would say, I paid the price of the ticket, and I cut my losses, and I only must suffer one way, which is the fact that I just paid for the price of the ticket, and I'll go out and hang out with my Rickoid friends instead. But the first example, the example might be, well, okay, I spent all this money on this ticket, I just got to stick it out and watch the whole thing, and the economist would say, I've lost time and I've lost money, and so they're saying, well, cut your losses. I think the life lesson there is not so much, not so much think about, well, you should really make the economically rational decision, but it's more about think about what do you value. You might just want to be at that game for another reason. You might want to avoid going home, right? You might want to spend more time with friends. You might want to just simply just have a different value measure other than time and money. It could be just emotional happiness. It could be any number of things, right? So that's to me, when I look at the sunk cost example, I think in the business world, it's a time-honored principle to not fall into the sunk cost fallacy. I think there are cases in personal decision-making where it does make sense. It just make the explicit choice would be my recommendation. So those are some of the examples on the descriptive side. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the prescriptive side other than say that there are ways to solve these issues by just being really rigorous. On the framework side, it's decision quality assessment. So I'll just page 4 just real quickly. So it's just simply the checklist of do I have the right frame? Have I created alternatives or decision sets that really feel like they're creative and they're also things I can actually do? Do I have the right information? So have I de-biased my information, my assessments? Do I understand what I want? So am I an economic decision maker, or do I care about time, et cetera? Do I have a good financial model or calculation engine? And then can I act? And so it's things like this that get you to the right answer. I'll page back one slide here and just talk. The laundry list is there's some frameworks, tool examples. I think there are some different ways to structure a problem. Talked about scenario planning. I talked and then some other things. This is kind of the broad area of decision analysis, but concept of decision tree frameworks, real options, but there are ways around this. I'll leave you just with the one calculation example. We have a lot of things here. So for example, this is a very simple example. This is a real project I worked on several years ago. It was, what is the value of delaying my investment? And this is a time what they want to know is this is the overwhelming issue. Is like, I don't know about these regulations, so maybe I should just wait, or I should invest now. And it's called a scrubber, FGD. And in this case, we looked at what if you delayed 1 year, what if you delayed 2 years, and then what's the underlying uncertainty? It was this emission allowance level. And in this case, higher numbers were better, and their answer was there's zero value in delay. In fact, if you delayed 1 year, it's like 20 million lost. Delayed 2 years, it's even worse. So that's the kind. So some of the things we talked about, some of those biases and heuristics can be remedied by some of these tools. And so if I leave you with one thing, it's to think about in your own work. Do some of these principles work out for you in your personal lives? I encourage you to think about, are there options? Is there flexibility? Are there uncertainties that you're not thinking about? And if you're going to go with one of these heuristics, then make a choice. And it's sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but I think they're always, as you can tell, always very interesting.